She was 28 years old, standing at the door of a man the city feared, and she was the one who knocked. Amara Brooks didn't come with a weapon. She came with a signature page, a shaking hand, and a debt so large it had already swallowed her family whole. The man on the other side of that door didn't need to threaten her. The math did it for him. Marry him, save them, lose herself. If this story moves you, like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this goes. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Amara always thought was the cruelest detail. Not a Friday, when the week was already ruined. Not a Monday, when bad news felt expected. A Tuesday, ordinary, unremarkable, and tucked between a grocery circular and a water bill was a single white envelope with no return address that would end the life her family had spent 30 years pretending to build. She read it standing at the mailbox in her robe, barefoot on the cold concrete of the Portland driveway, because her legs stopped working somewhere around the third paragraph. The number printed in the middle of the page had too many digits. She counted them twice. Then she sat down on the front step and didn't move for 11 minutes, which she knew because the neighbors' sprinklers clicked on and clicked off in that time. And she watched them like they were the only real thing left in the world, $54,000, plus interest compounded weekly at a rate that no legitimate lender would ever print on paper. Her father's name was at the top, Winston Brooks, the man who coached her little league team when she was 9 and couldn't throw straight. The man who drove her to every college interview in a car that needed the heat fixed but never got it fixed because he always had somewhere else to put the money. The man who, apparently, had been borrowing from people who didn't use banks for the better part of 3 years. She folded the letter, put it in her robe pocket, went inside and made coffee she didn't drink. Winston was still asleep at 9 in the morning. He'd been sleeping late since he lost the hardware store, which was 8 months ago now, which felt like 8 years. Amara stood in the hallway outside his bedroom door and listened to him breathe and thought about knocking and decided against it. She'd made that decision 4 times in the past month. Each time she chose silence, the problem got larger. She understood that. She made the choice anyway, because some part of her still believed it would resolve itself. The letter made clear that it would not. Her younger sister Priya was eating cereal at the kitchen table with her textbook spread around her in the particular chaos of someone who was brilliant and overwhelmed in equal measure. Priya was 22 and halfway through a nursing program and hadn't done anything wrong in her entire life, except be born into this family, which Amara had decided years ago counted as a kind of misfortune that the girl deserved to be protected from. "You look terrible," Priya said, without looking up. "Good morning to you, too. Did you sleep?" "Some." Priya looked up then. She had their mother's eyes, dark and reading, the kind that caught things before you offered them. "What happened?" Amara put the letter on the table between the cereal bowl and a textbook on pharmacology. She watched her sister read it, watched the spoon stop moving, watched the color change around Priya's mouth. "Is this real?" "Yes." "How long has he—" "I don't know. I'm going to talk to him today." "Amara." Priya's voice had dropped to the register she used when she was trying not to panic, which meant she was already panicking. "These aren't bank people. This isn't the kind of thing where you call and make a payment arrangement." "I know what it is. Do you?" "Because the address at the bottom—" Priya turned the letter over as if looking for something on the back, then put it down. "I looked that address up last semester when Dantai said someone he knew got a loan from people like this. It's a front. It's not a real business." "I know." "So what are we going to do?" Amara took the letter back. She folded it along the same crease. She put it in her pocket again. "Let me talk to Dad first." She gave Winston an hour to wake up on his own. Then she knocked. He was sitting on the edge of the bed in the half-dark, with his reading glasses on, and nothing to read, which told her he'd been awake longer than he pretended. He was 61 and looked it in the morning light, the weight of the past year distributed across his face in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. He'd been a big man once, broad and certain, the kind of father who took up space in a room without trying. What was left of that now was mostly the posture, the way he sat with his shoulders set even when everything else had gone loose. "I got a letter," Amar said. He didn't ask which one. That told her everything. "Dad?" "Amara?" $54,000. She wasn't yelling. She was very deliberately not yelling because if she started, she wasn't sure she'd be able to stop, and she needed information more than she needed release. I need you to tell me how long. He rubbed his face with both hands. The sound his palms made against the stubble was rough and tired. It started small. It always starts small. I was trying to get the store back. I thought, ah. He stopped. Started again. There was a game, not just cards, not just dice. I thought I had a system. There is no system. I know that now. You knew it then. Her voice cracked at the edge of that sentence, and she hated it. Hated the way grief could ambush you in the middle of anger and turn something sharp into something broken. You knew it then, Dad. You just chose anyway. He didn't argue. That was the worst part, she realized. He'd stopped having defenses weeks ago. Whatever elaborate architecture of justification he'd been living inside had collapsed at some point, and now there was just the man, sitting in the dark, holding the wreckage. Are they going to come here? She asked. They sent someone last week, to the corner, just to let me know they knew where we lived. Amara felt something cold move through her chest. You let them come to this house, where Priya lives. I didn't let them. You created the situation that let them. She turned away from him, faced the wall, breathed. One breath, then another. The plaster had a water stain shaped like nothing in particular. She stared at it until her heartbeat slowed. I need a number, not 54. The real number, with whatever they've added in the past month. He was quiet a moment. Somewhere close to 70 by now, the way they calculate interest. Okay? She turned back. I need you to not touch anything. Not one card game, not one bet, not one phone call to anyone. Do you understand me? Amara, Dad, do you understand me? Yes. She left him there and spent the rest of the morning on her laptop at the kitchen table while Priya went to class and the house went quiet. She was methodical about it, which was the only way she knew how to function when the ground was this unstable. Spreadsheet first, emotion later. She built a picture of what they had and what they owed, and the gap between those two numbers, and when she finished building it, she sat with it for a long time. The gap was not closable. Not by her. Not within the window the letter had specified, which was 30 days. She'd been working at a middle school for 3 years, teaching language arts to 7th graders who mostly didn't want to be there, which she found she had some sympathy for some days and no sympathy for on others. She made $36,000 a year. She had $4,000 in savings, which represented 2.5 years of discipline and skipped vacations and driving a car with a cracked dashboard because she couldn't afford to replace it. $4,000 against 70 and growing. She closed the laptop. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her mind working in the particular way it worked when she was trying to solve something that didn't want to be solved. She was the kind of person who cataloged options, always had been. First solution, second solution, third solution, discard the impossible ones, work with what remained. It was how she survived middle school herself, how she got through college on scholarships that required her to be excellent all the time, how she'd been managing this family for the past decade while her mother's health declined and her father slowly came unmoored. She cataloged now. The first options were the obvious ones. They were also the impossible ones. There was no bank loan large enough and fast enough. There was no family member to call, and her mother's family was in Georgia and had nothing to spare, and Winston's family had stopped speaking to him years ago over a different, smaller version of this same story. There were no assets left to sell. The house was rented. The car was 12 years old and worth approximately nothing. The fourth option she wrote down and then stared at for a long time before she admitted she'd already known it was the only one. She'd heard the name Kong Min Jai the same way everyone in certain Portland circles had heard it. Not directly, not loudly, but in the particular way information about dangerous men traveled, which was carefully and in pieces. She'd heard it from Marcus Webb, who ran a dry cleaning operation on Morrison Street that wasn't entirely about dry cleaning. She'd heard it the way you heard a weather warning, something large moving in the distance, nothing you wanted to be near. 3 months ago, she had done a favor for Marcus's cousin, a girl named Destiny, who'd gotten into trouble with a landlord who turned out to have connections to the wrong people, and Amara had helped her draft a complaint to the housing authority that actually went somewhere. Marcus had thanked her in the way Marcus thanked people, which was not with words but with the implication of reciprocity. She called him. He picked up on the second ring and she said, "I need an introduction." Silence on the line. Then, "To who?" She told him. More silence. "Amara, you understand what you're asking." "I understand exactly what I'm asking. I need 30 minutes, that's all." "People don't just get 30 minutes with Marcus." She kept her voice steady. It cost her something. "You told me to call if I ever needed anything real. This is real." He took a long breath. "I'll reach out, no promises. And Amara, if this happens, you go in there knowing he doesn't do half measures. Whatever he offers, there's no renegotiating later." "I understand." She hung up, looked at the wall, went to work. The call came 4 days later, while she was between periods, standing in the hallway outside her classroom with a cup of cold coffee. An unfamiliar number, a voice she didn't recognize, a time and an address. Nothing else. She wrote it on the back of a hall pass and memorized it, and threw the pass away. She didn't tell Priya where she was going. She didn't tell her father, her. She drove the 12-year-old car downtown to a building that didn't advertise what it was, parked in a garage that charged $18 for an hour she didn't plan to need, and took an elevator to the 14th floor wearing the one blazer she owned that didn't have chalk dust on it. The man who met her wasn't Kong Min Jae. He was a Korean man in his 40s, broad and expressionless, who looked at her with the kind of thoroughness that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with assessment. He didn't speak. He opened a door and stood aside. The office she walked into was large and deliberately underdecorated. No art on the walls. A desk that cost more than her car. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city in the gray November light. And behind the desk, Kong Min Jae. She'd expected older. She'd expected louder, somehow. She'd built a picture in her mind from the pieces of things she'd heard, and the picture was of something hulking and obvious. What she got instead was a man who looked 30-something and sat very still and watched her cross the room with eyes that were absolutely calm in a way that she found immediately more unsettling than any expression of threat would have been. He said nothing while she sat down, said nothing while she settled herself, took one breath, looked at him directly. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Marcus Webb has a high opinion of you." His English was precise, lightly accented, with the particular quality of someone who had learned the language to perfection and then deliberately let it stay slightly formal. "He said you were worth 30 minutes. We'll see." "I need a debt cleared," she said. She wasn't going to waste his time with approach. She put the letter on the desk and pushed it toward him. "My father borrowed from people who work adjacent to your network. The debt is close to $70,000 now. I have 30 days. He picked up the letter. Read it. His expression didn't change. He set it back down. "This name," he said, tapping the bottom of the letter. "What do you know about them?" "Enough to know I couldn't go to them directly." "Smart." He looked at her again with that same measuring quiet. "And what are you offering in exchange?" She'd rehearsed this. She'd practiced in the car, in the shower, at 3 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. She'd run through 15 versions of the answer, and every version felt insufficient. And this morning she'd decided that insufficient was what she had, and she was going to say it anyway. "I don't have money," she said. "I don't have connections. I don't have anything you need." She kept her eyes on his face. "What I have is me, and I understand that a man in your position sometimes needs a wife." The word landed in the room and sat there. She watched him watch her say it. "A contract," she said. "Not a real marriage. A legal arrangement. I sign whatever you need me to sign. I appear wherever you need me to appear, and in exchange you clear the debt and make sure the people holding it don't come near my family again." He was quiet for a long time. She didn't feel it. "You came here," he said finally, "not knowing if I was the kind of man who would throw you out or keep you against your will. And you made this offer." "Yes? Why?" "Because my sister is 22 years old, and she's going to be a nurse, and she doesn't deserve to inherit this. And my father," her voice almost broke. She held it. "My father made terrible choices. He's still my father." Kang Min Jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the letter again, folded it once, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I have conditions," he said. "So do I." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. Tell me yours first. My sister never knows what this is. She believes we met through Marcus, that this is a genuine relationship that moved fast. She doesn't know about the debt. Amar's voice was steady. My father gets help with his addiction, not money, actual help. Counseling, support, whatever it takes. And I want it in writing that I can leave when this arrangement is no longer necessary. No retaliation, no complications. He nodded slowly. My conditions. You maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage at all times, including in front of my associates and my family. You ask no questions about business. You do not attempt to contact law enforcement or provide information to any outside party. And, he paused, you do not lie to me. Whatever else this arrangement is, you tell me the truth. Why does that matter to you? Because everyone around me lies, he said, without any particular emotion around the words. It becomes exhausting. She put her hand out across the desk. He looked at it for a moment, then he shook it. His hand was very cold. The paperwork was handled by a lawyer whose name Amara was not given, in a separate office on the same day. She signed 9 pages she was given 2 hours to read. She read every word. When she called Marcus from the parking garage afterward, he picked up on the first ring. Done? He asked. Done. How do you feel? She sat in the driver's seat of her 12-year-old car and stared at the concrete pillar in front of her and told him the truth. I feel like I jumped off something and I don't know yet if there's water at the bottom. He didn't have anything useful to say to that, and to his credit, he didn't try. The debt was cleared within 48 hours. She got the confirmation text from a number she didn't have saved, a single line, resolved, no further contact from that quarter. She told her father the debt was gone. She told him it was handled through connections she couldn't explain, and she watched something complicated move through his face, relief and shame in proportions that she couldn't have ranked even if she tried. She told him she'd made an arrangement to deal with it. She didn't tell him what the arrangement was. She told him she was moving to New York. 3 days later, a car arrived at 6 in the morning, a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who carried her 2 bags without being asked. Priya stood on the front step and held her for a long time and said, "Call me every day." And Amara said every day, and meant it, and also knew that every conversation from this point forward would be built on an architecture of omission that she'd have to maintain indefinitely. She didn't cry until the car turned onto the interstate and Portland disappeared behind her, and even then she kept it silent. The kind of crying that doesn't ask permission, tears running down into the collar of her coat while she watched the city go gray and small in the rear window. She told herself she was doing this to protect them. She told herself that so many times over the next 6 hours that by the time the car reached New York, the words had worn smooth and lost their edges, and she couldn't feel them anymore. Kang Min-jae's penthouse was on the 52nd floor of a building in Midtown, and when the elevator opened directly into the entrance hall, Amara stood in the doorway and looked at the space. Marble floors, high ceilings, windows from floor to ceiling showing the city lit up like something out of a movie, and felt the specific smallness of someone who had grown up in a house where the gutters needed replacing. She had expected him to be there waiting. He wasn't. It was the broad man from the office, whose name turned out to be Han, who showed her to a room down a long hallway. Not a guest room. Her own room, large and simply furnished, with a lock on the inside of the door. "Mr. Kong thought you would want privacy," Han said. "The code for the building is," he recited a number. "You can come and go as you need. This is your home for the duration." "Where is he?" "He had business tonight. He'll be here tomorrow morning." She stood in the room alone and listened to the city 40-something stories below, the distant, compressed hum of 10 million people who didn't know her name. Then her phone buzzed, a message from a number she'd saved under initials only. 3 words. "Sleep well. Tomorrow." She put the phone down. She changed out of her travel clothes and lay on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling and made herself be honest about what she'd done, which was something she owed herself even if she owed no one else. She had sold herself to a man who frightened an entire city. She had done it for love. She didn't know yet if that made her brave or just desperate. She was still deciding when sleep came for her, sudden and total, and took the question away until morning, when she heard something she hadn't expected, coming from down the hall. The sound of someone cooking, and the entirely ridiculous, treacherous, unwelcome thought arrived before she could stop it. He's already awake. The smell reached her before anything else. Garlic hitting oil, the low hiss of something in a pan, coffee already brewed and sitting somewhere close enough that she could feel it in the back of her throat before she opened her eyes. Amara lay still for a moment and made herself remember where she was. 52nd floor. New York. The room with the lock she'd used. The contract with 9 pages she'd signed with a hand that didn't shake only because she'd practiced not letting it shake. She sat up. The city outside was gray and enormous and indifferent, morning light cutting through the floor-to-ceiling glass at a low angle that made everything look expensive and remote. She'd slept in her clothes. She didn't remember deciding to do that. She found the bathroom, washed her face, looked at herself in a mirror that was better lit than any mirror she'd owned in Portland. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd made a large decision and hadn't finished processing it. She looked like someone who hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She followed the smell down the hallway. The kitchen was at the far end of the open living space, separated from it by nothing but a change in flooring, and Kang Min-jae was standing at the stove with his back to her in a gray long-sleeve shirt and dark trousers, no jacket, no tie, everything about him quieter than the man she'd met across a desk 3 days ago. He heard her come in. She was sure of that. He didn't seem like a man who missed sounds, but he didn't turn around immediately. He finished whatever he was doing first. Then he turned. "You slept," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Sit. Coffee's done." She sat at the island, which had 4 stools and the kind of deliberate emptiness that said the space wasn't used for casual things. He poured coffee without asking how she took it and set the cup in front of her, then went back to the stove. She watched him. She couldn't help it. She was trying to reconcile the 2 versions of him she had, the still dangerous man behind the desk and this, whatever this was, a person making food at 7 in the morning in his own kitchen. He moved efficiently, no wasted motion. She had the sense that this was something he did alone, regularly, not performance. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know." "I could have figured out food. I was already up." He plated 2 portions of something that turned out to be eggs with scallions and a side of rice that he'd clearly made from scratch, not a microwave packet. He set one in front of her and sat across the island with his own. Eat. She ate. It was good, simple and precise, the way he apparently did most things. She didn't comment on it because she had the feeling complimenting his cooking would land wrong this early, too soft, too domestic. Wrong register for what they actually were to each other. They ate in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't comfortable silence exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the silence of 2 people who didn't know yet what kind of silence they were supposed to have. "I need to know your schedule," he said. "I don't have one yet. I need to find a teaching position." He looked up. "You want to work?" "I'm going to work." That wasn't in the contract either way, but yes. She met his eyes. "I'm not going to sit in this apartment." He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "There's a private school in the Upper East Side, Clement Academy. I have a relationship with the board. If you want an introduction, I'll find my own position." I was offering convenience, not control. "I understand the difference. I still want to find my own." She set down her fork. "This is going to work better if we're clear early on. I'm not an object you're managing. I'm a person who signed a contract. There's a difference." Something moved through his expression. Not anger, something more attentive than that, like she'd said something that required actually filing away. "Understood," he said. "Is it?" "Yes." He picked up his coffee. "You're more direct than I expected." "You hired a person, not a piece of furniture." "I didn't hire you. You contracted me. The distinction matters less than you think from where I'm sitting." He said nothing to that. He finished his coffee. He took both plates to the sink and rinsed them with the same efficiency he did everything else. And Amara watched the muscles in his forearms and thought about the fact that this man had people afraid of him across 3 states, and he was doing dishes at 7 in the morning, and none of it made a coherent picture yet. "There's a dinner Friday," he said, still facing the sink. "Associates of mine. You'll need to be there." "What's the cover story for how we met?" "A mutual contact introduced us 4 months ago. We kept it private because I keep everything private. We married quickly because I don't do things slowly when I've made a decision. He turned. That part is true, actually. Anything I need to know about the people at the dinner? Don't ask about business. Don't offer personal information. Let them come to you. A pause. You're better at reading rooms than most people. I noticed that when you came to my office. Use it. She filed that away. The fact that he noticed things. The fact that he told her he noticed. What do you get out of a wife? She asked. Specifically, the business reason. He considered the question without seeming bothered by it. A man in my position who has no family, no anchoring relationships. It reads as either dangerous or temporary. Neither serves me. A wife signals stability. A marriage signals that I intend to remain. And the kind of people you work with care about that. Some of them care more about that than money. He leaned against the counter. You're also... He paused, seemed to choose the word carefully. Unexpected. You don't fit any category they'll try to put you in. That's useful. Because I'm black. He didn't flinch from it. Because you're not Korean, you're not connected to any of their circles, you're a school teacher from Portland, and you sat across from me and negotiated terms like you'd done it before. Yes, that combination will unsettle people who are accustomed to knowing exactly what they're looking at. Amara looked at him for a long moment. You're very honest for someone in your line of work. I told you I find lying exhausting. You told me you wanted me not to lie to you. That's different from you not lying. Another thing that almost became a smile at the corner of his mouth. Fair point. He straightened up. Han will give you a phone and a card this morning. The card has no limit. I'm not telling you to use it. I'm telling you it exists. We have a joint public profile beginning today. Social media will be managed by someone on my team. You don't need to do anything there. If someone contacts you claiming to know me, you call Han before you respond to them. Anyone. Have you had problems with that before? Once. The word closed the subject completely. She learned the penthouse that first week the way she learned most environments. Systematically and quietly. She found its rhythms. Minjae was usually gone before she woke, back sometime in the late afternoon, occasionally not until after midnight. Han was there during the day, not intrusive, more like a piece of furniture that occasionally spoke and always seemed to know what she needed before she asked for it. There were 2 other people on the household staff she met briefly. A woman named Seo, who came 3 times a week to clean, and a man she only ever heard called Driver. She found a teaching position herself. It took 11 days and 3 interviews at a public middle school in Queens that had nothing to do with Minjae's contacts and everything to do with her credentials and the way she handled a classroom management question that the principal had clearly used to weed out a dozen candidates before her. She started the following Monday. She didn't tell Minjae until dinner the night before. Queens, he said. 45 minutes by subway. I can arrange. I take the subway. He looked at her across the dinner table, which they'd fallen into sharing most evenings without ever formally deciding to, and said nothing for a moment. Fine. That was easier than I expected. I pick my arguments. He refilled his water glass. Queens is not an argument worth having. She laughed. It surprised her. The sound came out before she'd approved it. She looked at her plate and took a breath, and when she looked back up, he was watching her with that particular stillness he had, the one that wasn't blank but wasn't readable either. What? She said. Nothing. He went back to eating. The Friday dinner was at a restaurant that had been closed to the public for the evening, 12 people around a table that could have held 30. The kind of gathering that looked like a business dinner and was conducting business in every sentence, even when the sentences were about wine or sports. The men were mostly Korean, ranging from 50s to 70s, with one exception, a broad Russian man named Volkov, who sat at the far end and watched everything with the exhausted patience of someone who had survived things by watching carefully. Amara was the only woman. She wore a dress she'd bought with her own money, dark green, nothing that announced itself too loudly. She sat beside Minjae and listened more than she spoke and tracked the table the way she tracked a difficult classroom. Who was performing for whom, where the real power sat, whose opinions others waited for before forming their own. The real power at the table was not Minjae, though everyone at the table behaved as if it might be. The real power was an older man called Chairman Park, who spoke rarely and softly, and whose eyes moved to Minjae every time someone else said something significant, checking, registering. An hour into dinner, Chairman Park spoke to Amara directly for the first time. He did it in Korean, just a few words, with a sideways look at Min Jae. Min Jae answered in Korean without inflection. Park smiled, small, controlled, and switched to English. "I asked your husband where he found such a serious woman," he said to Amara. "He said serious finds serious." "That sounds like him," she said. Park studied her. "You teach children. 7th grade, language arts. Difficult age. They're honest. They don't know yet how to hide what they think." She held his gaze. "I find that useful." Something shifted in the old man's face. He nodded once, the nod of someone revising an estimate upward, and returned to his food. Under the table, Min Jae's hand found hers briefly. A single pressure, 2 seconds, released. She didn't look at him. She reached for her wine. The drive home was quiet. The city moved past the windows, dark and lit and moving with the specific restlessness of New York at 11 at night. Amara watched it and processed the evening and felt the particular tiredness of having been performing in a secondary language all night. Not her words, not her face exactly, a version of herself calibrated for a room she didn't actually belong in. "Park," she said, "he's above you. He was my mentor." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "He's above me in some ways. In others, not anymore. He was testing me. Everyone at that table was testing you." "I know. I'm saying Park specifically. He wasn't testing whether I was real. He was testing whether you'd chosen well." She looked at Min Jae. "Those are different tests." He looked at her for a moment in the dark of the car. "Yes," he said. "They are. Did I pass?" He hasn't called to object. With Park, that's passing. She turned back to the window. 6 weeks into the arrangement, and the shape of it was becoming clearer to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The quiet rhythm of shared evenings, the way Min Jae asked her opinion on things that had nothing to do with their contract, the 3 times she'd woken in the middle of the night to the low sound of him on the phone in his office, and the strange feeling of being unsettled, not by the sound but by the silence that followed it. She was not supposed to be feeling anything. She'd been careful about that. She'd kept a list in her head of exactly what this was, recited when necessary, a contract, a business arrangement, the things she did to save her family. It was working. The list was working. Then he came home on a Tuesday in December with a cut above his eyebrow that had been closed with butterfly tape but was still seeping at the edge. And she was at the kitchen table with her students' essays, and she stood up and said, "Sit down," before she'd made a decision to say anything at all. He sat. She got the first aid kit from the bathroom. She'd found it in the first week, filed its location, the way she filed everything. She stood in front of him and cleaned the cut with antiseptic, and he sat very still and let her. And the whole thing took maybe 4 minutes. And when she finished, she stepped back, and the distance between them was not as large as it should have been. "What happened?" she asked. "Business." "Did the other person look worse?" Something in his face shifted. "Yes." "Good." She put the antiseptic back in the kit. "I made food. There's rice on the stove." She went back to the essays. She heard him move through the kitchen behind her, heard the sounds of him eating, felt the shape of him in the room the way you feel weather changing. She did not look up. She graded 4 essays before she realized she'd read the same paragraph 3 times and retained nothing. The phone call from Portland came on a Thursday morning in January, while she was on the subway, standing in the packed car with one hand on a pole and her bag between her feet. It was Priya's voice, and the sound of it, higher than normal, compressed, told her before the words did. "He's gone again," Priya said. "Dad, he didn't come home last night, and he's not answering his phone, and I found a receipt in his jacket from—" A breath. "Amara. It's a casino receipt." Amara closed her eyes. The subway car swayed. Someone's elbow was in her ribs. "How much?" $300, but that's what I found. I don't know what I didn't find." "Okay." "The counselor he was seeing, I called them this morning. He missed his last 2 appointments." "Okay." She breathed, opened her eyes. "I'll call Marcus. I'll see what I can find out. Don't—" She stopped herself. "Don't panic" was useless instruction. "Call me if you hear from him." She hung up, stood in the swaying car, her father, 3,000 miles away, pulling loose from every thread she'd sewn in to hold him. She called Marcus. He picked up, and she told him, and he was quiet for a moment that told her he already knew something. He's been at a place on Burnside, Marcus said. Low stakes, new crowd. He started a couple weeks ago. Marcus, I didn't know until yesterday. I would have called. The people watching out for him. They're keeping him safe. The debt situation is clear. Nobody's moving on him. But Amara, I can't stop a man from walking through a door. She got off at the wrong stop, stood on the platform while the train left without her, and the platform emptied around her and the cold air moved through the station from somewhere underground. She could call Min Jae. She knew it. He'd said the arrangement included her father's recovery, not just the debt. She had grounds to say something, but saying something meant admitting that the thing she'd traded everything for was already failing, that her father was already slipping, that the rescue she'd believed she was performing was perhaps not a rescue at all, but only a delay. She took the next train. She went to school. She taught 5 periods and attended a staff meeting and rode the subway home in the dark. Minji was in the living room when she came in, jacket off, on a call that he ended when he heard the door. He looked at her once and said, "Sit down." "I'm fine." "You're not. Sit down." She sat. She didn't take her coat off. She told him about her father in flat, precise language, the way she reported things when she was most afraid of them. He listened without interrupting, which she was becoming familiar with, the way he heard things fully before he responded, the way he didn't fill silences with noise. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll make a call." "I don't want you to fix it. I want you to—" She stopped. "I don't know what I want." "I know." He stood and moved to the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator, heard the stove. After a while, he brought 2 cups of tea and set one in front of her and sat across from her and said nothing. And they sat like that while the city made its sounds beyond the glass. It was the most real thing that had happened since she'd arrived. She understood, sitting there with her coat still on and her hands wrapped around a cup, that she was in serious trouble. Not the kind of trouble she'd walked into when she signed 9 pages with a steady hand. Different trouble. The kind that didn't come with a contract or a clear exit point. She made herself think about her father instead. The weeks that followed had a shape to them that felt deceptively ordinary. Her school, his disappearances and returns, dinners, the charity gala in March that Min Jae had mentioned weeks out as something significant without explaining why. He gave her the details 2 days before. Black tie, Midtown Hotel, 200 guests from every stratum of New York that mattered. He also told her something he hadn't mentioned before. "My family will be there. Part of them." A pause. "My mother." Amara looked up. In 3 months, he'd mentioned his family in fragments only. A grandmother who was gone, a father he didn't speak about with any warmth. The outline of a childhood she was beginning to understand was not a simple thing. "She knows about our arrangement? She knows I'm married, she knows your name and that you're a teacher. She doesn't know the mechanics." He met her eyes. "She will try to read you. She reads everyone. Don't try to impress her. It won't work, and she'll know you're trying." "What does work with her?" He thought for a moment. "Honesty. Even when it's not what she wants to hear. She's had 50 years of people telling her what she wants to hear." The gala was the kind of event Amara had seen in movies and never expected to be inside. The ballroom was high-ceilinged and full of the specific, pressurized energy of people who were important or wanted to be seen with people who were. She wore a dress Min Jae had sent to the apartment the day before. Deep burgundy, floor-length, nothing ostentatious, with a note that said only Friday. Han will arrange transportation. She'd worn it because it fit perfectly, and she didn't want to think about how he'd known her size. His mother was a small Korean woman in her mid-60s named Kang Soo-yeon, with silver hair and posture so precise it looked structural. She found Amara within the first half hour, which Amara suspected was not accidental. "My son says you teach middle school," Soo-yeon said, in English, which told Amara something. 7th grade. "Difficult children." "They're not difficult. They're at a hard age. There's a difference." Soo-yeon looked at her steadily. "He chose you." "He did. I was not consulted. I imagine that's not unusual with him." A pause. Something in the older woman's face, not softening, but recalibrating. "No," she said, "it isn't." She looked across the room to where Minjae was speaking with a group of men near the bar. Is he good to you? Amara followed her gaze. Minjae was standing with his shoulders set, listening more than talking, the same way he always was, and she thought about tea on the couch and butterfly tape and the hand under the table at Chairman Park's dinner. Yes, she said, and realized with a small controlled shock that she meant it. Su Yan studied her for another moment. Then she moved away, and Amara stood and breathed and felt the evening rearranging itself around something she hadn't budgeted for. Minjae found her 20 minutes later. My mother spoke to you. She did. What did she say? She wanted to know if you were good to me. A beat. What did you tell her? The truth. She picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. Is that a problem? He looked at her with that stillness that she'd stopped finding unreadable weeks ago, had begun instead to find clarifying. No, he said, that's not a problem. She told him she was pregnant 9 days later. She told him she was pregnant at breakfast, standing at the counter, because she'd bought 3 tests the day before and taken all 3 and sat with the results for 17 hours. And by morning, she'd burned through every version of how this could go and landed, exhausted, on the only approach she had left, which was the same approach she'd used at the beginning of all of this. Direct. I'm pregnant, she said. He was reading something on his phone. He stopped. I found out yesterday. I believe it's twins. I need to see a doctor to confirm. He put the phone down. The silence in the kitchen was a different kind of silence from any of the ones she'd cataloged before. She watched his face and could not read it, which hadn't happened in weeks. She'd become fluent enough in his expressions by now that the absence of legibility felt like something being withheld. Say something, she said. He stood up from the stool. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her and the city spread out behind him, enormous and continuing. Minjae. Give me a moment. She gave him the moment. She watched his reflection in the glass. His face, finally, doing something she hadn't seen it do. Something that looked like being undone from the inside. When he turned, his expression had rearranged itself back toward control, but not completely. Are you all right? Physically, yes. Emotionally, she stopped. I don't have an answer to that yet. He nodded. He came back to the island, not to his stool, but to the side where she was standing, closer than he usually stood, and she made herself hold the ground. I'll take care of you, he said. Whatever you need. That's not what I need to hear right now. Then what do you need? She looked at him. The distance between them, already small, felt suddenly negotiable in a way that terrified her. I need to know what this means. For the contract, she made herself say it. For whatever this actually is, because I don't know what this actually is anymore, and I need to know before I figure out anything else. He was quiet. He looked at her the way he had at the dinner when Chairman Park tested her. Attentive, calculating, but under that, something warmer and less voluntary. He opened his mouth to answer, and that was when she heard it from down the hall. His phone, ringing on the kitchen counter where he'd left it. He glanced at it. She saw the name on the screen before he turned it over, Vice Chair. He looked at her. She looked at him. I have to, he started. Go, she said. Her voice came out flat. She didn't know if that was control or just the sound of something closing. He took the call in his office. She heard the door click. She stood in the kitchen alone with the city behind her and both hands on the counter, and she stayed very still for a long time. And then she walked down to his office and stood outside the door and heard through it a version of his voice she hadn't heard in weeks. Clipped, cold, issuing instructions about something she couldn't parse, but whose register she could read exactly. She stood at that door for 3 minutes. Then she walked back to the kitchen and sat and put her hand flat on the counter over the place where he'd been sitting. She was going to have twins. She was married to a crime boss. She was in love with him. She understood that now, standing in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, understanding it not as an arrival, but as the recognition of something that had already been true for longer than she'd let herself admit. And she had absolutely no idea what to do with any of it, because through that office door, muffled but unmistakable, she could hear the voice of the man she had somehow fallen in love with, ordering something done in the kind of tone that meant someone, somewhere, was about to be hurt. She didn't move from the kitchen counter for 40 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the microwave the way she watched things when her mind was processing something too large to hold all at once, tracking small, measurable things so the rest of her could work without supervision. 7:14 when he went into the office. 7:53 when the door opened again. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard them stop outside the kitchen. "Amara." "I'm here." He came in. He'd put his jacket on, which told her he was leaving. His face was back to the version she'd first met across the desk. Controlled, surface smooth, everything tucked under. But his eyes were doing something different, something that cost him. She could tell the way a held breath cost. "I have to go," he said. "I know. We need to finish the conversation we started." "Yes." She looked at him. "Go handle whatever it is. Come back. We'll finish it." A pause. He seemed to be gauging whether that was acceptance or dismissal. "Are you all right?" "I'm pregnant and standing in a kitchen in New York at 8 in the morning, and I just heard you through a door using a voice I hadn't heard in a while," she said. "I'm managing." He didn't look away. He stood at the edge of the kitchen and took her in with that full attention of his, and she let him, because hiding things from him had begun to feel like a waste of energy she didn't have. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she agreed. He left. She listened to the elevator, then she was alone in the penthouse with the city outside, and her hand still on the counter, and two embryos that were, according to 3 separate tests, definitively present and already changing every calculation she'd made. She called her doctor in Portland first, a woman she'd been seeing since college, who knew her history and didn't ask unnecessary questions. She scheduled a telehealth appointment for the following morning. She wrote down what she needed to ask. She made herself eat something. She went to school. She taught all 5 periods. She ran a small group discussion on narrative voice that turned unexpectedly generative, one of those classroom moments where the material took on its own life and the kids forgot to be 12 and just became people thinking about something. She held on to that for the 20-minute subway ride home, the feeling of work that made sense in a clean way, that didn't require her to weigh risk or manage fear. Minjae was home by 7. She heard him before she saw him, the particular sound of his keycard, and then the particular quality of his silence, which she'd become fluent in the way you became fluent in any language you lived inside long enough. She was on the couch with a book she hadn't read a word of. He sat in the chair across from her. He didn't take his jacket off. "Talk," she said. "The contract didn't include this," he said. "Children weren't part of the arrangement." "No, they weren't. So we have to decide what they become." She put the book down. What are the options in your mind?" "The arrangement could be renegotiated to account for—" "Minjae." Her voice was flat. "Stop talking about this like it's a contract amendment." He stopped. He looked at her. He took his jacket off and laid it across the arm of the chair, which she'd come to recognize as the thing he did when he was letting himself stay somewhere instead of keeping the option of leaving. "I don't know how to talk about this any other way," he said. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he'd said to her in 4 months, which was saying something given that honesty was one of the 2 conditions he'd set from the beginning. "Then let me go first," she said. "I didn't plan this. I didn't engineer it to change our arrangement. I need you to know that." "I know that. I don't know what I want from you regarding them. I don't know what I want from you regarding any of this." She looked at her hands. "But I know that whatever this is has become something I wasn't prepared for. And I think you know that too. And I think we both know that the original contract stopped being the real structure of what we're doing a while ago." He was quiet. "Am I wrong?" she asked. "No," he said. "You're not wrong." The silence between them was different from any of the others she'd cataloged. It had a quality of exposure that she found both unbearable and, somewhere underneath, necessary. "I want them," she said. "I'm keeping them. That's not a question." "I know." "What do you want?" He looked at her for a long time. The city made its sounds outside. A siren somewhere, then gone. "I want—" He stopped. Started again. "I want to be something different from what I came from." She understood that completely. She also understood that wanting it and doing it were 2 separate things, and that the voice through the office door that morning had belonged to a man who was not finished with the thing he came from. She didn't say any of that. Not yet. She said, "Then we figure it out. One step. He nodded once. He stayed. For the next 6 weeks, something in the penthouse changed in a way that was difficult to name. It wasn't resolution. Too many things were still unresolved, still unnamed. But there was a quality of intention to it, a sense that both of them were, for the first time, attempting to build something rather than simply maintain an arrangement. He came home earlier. He asked about her students by name, the ones she'd mentioned more than once, and she understood that he remembered everything and had been storing it. She started telling him things she hadn't planned to offer, about her mother, who had died when Amara was 19 from a heart condition that the family had known about, not had money to properly treat. About the year after, when Amara had quietly become the functional adult in a household where her father was grieving and her sister was 14 and someone had to hold the shape of things. He listened the way he did everything, fully and without filling the space. In return, he gave her pieces. Not the whole picture, never that, but pieces. His grandmother, who had raised him for 7 years while his parents were, he paused there, selected words carefully, occupied with other things. The way she taught him to cook because she said a person who couldn't feed himself was always dependent on someone else's goodwill. The fact that he'd been, briefly, in his early 20s, trying to leave the structure he'd been born into. And the thing that had made that impossible was not a threat but a debt. A different kind of debt, one that couldn't be paid in money. She was 3 months along when Marcus Webb called. She was at school, end of the day, stacking essays into her bag, when her phone lit up with his name. She answered because she always answered Marcus when Priya or Winston might be involved. "Your father's in trouble," Marcus said. She sat down on the edge of her desk. "What kind?" "The expensive kind. He got in deep with someone new, Amara. Not our people. Someone on the east side who runs a different kind of operation." "How deep?" 22,000. And this isn't Min Jae's territory. These people. Marcus's voice had a quality she'd heard in it once before, when he told her about the letter that started everything. Careful. Contained. "They don't operate the way Min Jae does. They made contact with Priya." She stood up. "What do you mean they made contact with Priya?" "A man came to her apartment. Yesterday. He told her that her father owed money and that there were multiple ways to collect." The room felt very still. "Is she all right?" "She's scared. She called me this morning because she didn't know who else to call. She doesn't know about—" Marcus stopped. "She doesn't know the full picture. She said she tried to call you last night, but you didn't pick up." Amara opened her call log. Missed call from Priya at 11:47 p.m. She'd been asleep. She'd been deeply, completely asleep for the first time in weeks, and she had not heard the phone. "I'm calling her right now," Amara said. "Wait, there's something else." Something in his voice stopped her hand. "What?" "The people your father borrowed from. The name that came back to me when I started asking around." A pause. "The name is Choi Byung-won. Do you know that name?" She didn't. "Should I?" "Ask your husband," Marcus said. "Ask him specifically what Choi Byung-won's relationship is to the Kong organization. And ask him why, if these people are moving on your family, nobody in his network flagged it." The call ended. She stood in the empty classroom with her bag half packed, and the afternoon light coming through the windows at the angle that meant it was almost 4 o'clock, and she ran the name through everything she knew, which was limited, which was the product of 4 months of pointedly not asking about business. Choi Byung-won. She called Priya on the way out of the building. Her sister picked up on the first ring, the way she always did when she'd been waiting for a call, and the sound of her voice, tight, held, trying not to be scared, hit Amara somewhere below the ribs. "I'm okay," Priya said, before Amara could ask. "Tell me exactly what happened." Priya told her. A man, Korean, 30s, had come to her door at her apartment near the nursing school. He'd been polite in the particular way that makes polite terrifying. He'd known her name, her school schedule, the name of one of her professors. He'd said that her father had a financial obligation to some associates of his and that they wanted to discuss arrangements for resolution. He'd left a card with a phone number. He'd told her she had a week. "He knew where I live," Priya said. "I know." "Amara, how does someone like that know where I live?" "I'm handling it." "That's not an answer." "Priya." She made her voice steady. Made it the voice she'd been using since she was 19 to keep her sister from the full weight of things. I am handling it. Don't call the number on the card. Don't open the door to anyone you don't know. Call me for anything." She hung up, got on the subway, stood in the car with her hand around the pole and the name Choi Byung-won turning in her mind and the specific sensation of several things moving toward each other at speed. Min-jae wasn't home when she got to the penthouse. She called Han. "Where is he?" "He's in a meeting, Mrs. Kong. He's expected." "I need to speak to him. Now. This isn't about the pregnancy or anything that can wait." A pause. "I'll tell him you called." She changed out of her work clothes. She drank water. She did not eat, which she knew she was supposed to do but couldn't make herself do. She sat on the couch and made herself think clearly, which meant making herself hold the thing Marcus had said and really look at it. Why? If these people are moving on your family, has nobody in his network flagged it? There were several possible answers. The first was that the network didn't know, which implied a gap in coverage she hadn't been told about. The second was that the network knew and Min-jae hadn't told her, which meant he was managing her, information withheld in the service of maintaining an appearance. The third answer was the one she didn't want to hold, the one that had a shape like something swallowed wrong, sitting in her chest at a bad angle. The third answer was that someone inside the network had allowed it. Min-jae came home at 9. He saw her face when he walked in and stopped just inside the door. "Choi Byung-won," she said. Something moved through his expression, fast, controlled, gone before she could fully read it. But she'd seen it. That was what mattered. She'd seen the moment of knowing before the mask came back. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "Who is he?" "Amara." "Who is he?" She stood up. "Because someone using that name sent a man to my sister's apartment yesterday, to her door, and told her she had a week to arrange payment for a debt my father owes. And my question, the question I need you to answer right now, is how that happened when you have people whose entire purpose is making sure that my family is protected." He crossed the room. He didn't sit. He stood and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, something that had weight in it, something that cost. "Choi is..." He stopped. "He was a lieutenant, under me. 3 years ago, he left the organization. Not cleanly." "What does not cleanly mean?" "It means there was a disagreement about direction, about methods. He built something separate, east side, smaller but more aggressive." Min-jae's voice was controlled, but beneath it there was something taut she could hear like a wire under tension. "He's been a peripheral problem for 2 years. My people have been tracking his movements." "Tracking his movements?" She looked at him. "And nobody noticed that he'd gotten to my father." "Your father wasn't supposed to be in contact with anyone in that world. The conditions of the original..." "Don't!" Her voice came out harder than she intended, and she didn't pull it back. "Do not tell me about the original conditions. My father is an addict, and addicts don't follow conditions. That's what makes them addicts, and you knew that when you agreed to this." She took a breath. "My sister had a man at her door. My 22-year-old sister who doesn't know any of this, who thinks I married you because we fell in love, who is in nursing school and has done nothing except be unlucky enough to be related to me. I know." "Do you?" "Because my question isn't how Choi Byung-won found my father. My question is how he found my sister. How he knew where she lives, how he knew her name and her schedule. That's not something you learn from a man who owes you gambling debts." She held his gaze. "That's something you learn from someone who had that information already." The silence was different from any silence she'd been in with him. It had a texture, rough, electric, the specific quality of a room where something true was about to be said, and neither person wanted to be the one to say it. "There's a leak," Min-jae said. The words came out flat and final. "In your organization." "Yes." "Someone told Choi about my family, about Priya specifically." He didn't answer. She took the answer from the set of his jaw, the stillness that wasn't composure but its cousin, control being applied to something that wanted to break. "How long have you known?" she said. "I've suspected for 3 weeks. I've been working to confirm." 3 weeks. She let that sit. "You've known for 3 weeks that someone inside your organization may have been feeding information about my family to the man you described as more aggressive, and you didn't tell me." "I didn't want to alarm you while you're..." "Don't." The word came out like a door closing. "Do not say it's because of the pregnancy. Do not make me the reason you withheld information that directly concerns my sister's safety. That is not protection. That is management. His jaw tightened. You're right. I know I am. She turned away, went to the window, looked at the city. Her reflection looked back at her. Face she recognized, situation she didn't. Who is it? I don't know yet. Best guess? A pause. There are 3 people who would have access to the level of information Choi used. One of them I've worked with for 11 years. One of them is Han. She turned. Han. I'm not saying it's Han. I'm saying he has access. She thought about Han, who had been present and quiet and competent and kind to her in small, unremarked ways for 4 months. She thought about the way he'd known what she needed before she asked. She thought about all the information that passed through a person like that without ever appearing to. Who's the third? She said. Min-jae didn't answer immediately. The pause was a fraction longer than it should have been, and she felt it. Min-jae, who's the third person with that level of access? Vice Chair Lim, he said. My mother's brother. The room rearranged itself. Your uncle, she said. Yes. The call you took the morning I told you about the pregnancy. Something crossed his face. Yes. Your uncle has been feeding information about my family to a man who broke from your organization and has been building something more aggressive with it. She heard her own voice as if from a slight distance, very steady, the voice she used when she was most frightened. And you've known for 3 weeks that someone with that kind of access was the source. And you took his call in front of me and didn't... She stopped herself. She breathed. I don't know it's him, Min-jae said. I told you, I'm working to confirm. But you suspect him specifically, and you took his call. And you've been letting him have access to information about where we live, about my sister's location, about my family, for 3 weeks while you worked to confirm. She faced him. What happens when you confirm it? He met her eyes, and in his face, under the control, under the thing he'd been carrying for 3 weeks apparently without telling her, she saw it. The answer. Not in words, in the specific blankness of a man who knew what he was capable of and wasn't going to lie to her about it. She understood then, not abstractly, not theoretically. She understood it the way she understood things that lived in the body rather than the mind, in her sternum, in the sudden awareness of her own pulse, in the almost physical sensation of the last few months shifting on their axis and showing her what had been on the underside the whole time. The man who cooked at 7 in the morning and asked about her students by name and sat with her in silence when she was scared and had looked at her in a ballroom like she was something that mattered. That man was also the man whose face had just told her, without a single word, that when he confirmed his uncle's betrayal, someone was not going to walk away from the conversation. She was going to have twins. She was in love with a man who was never going to be finished with a world where that was how things concluded. I need to call my sister, she said. Her voice came from somewhere very far inside her. Amara, I need to call my sister and tell her to go somewhere safe tonight. I need you to arrange that. Whatever safe means in your world, I need it for her, right now, tonight. She held her voice together through force she could feel in her throat. Can you do that? Yes, I'll call Han, not Han. Her voice didn't break. She was very proud of that. Not until you know. He looked at her. She watched him absorb that. The fact that she'd gotten there, the fact that she was already thinking like someone who knew that trust in this world was not a feeling, but a calculation. I'll handle it myself, he said. Thank you. She went to the bedroom. She sat on the bed in the dark and put her hands over her stomach, not performing anything, not for anyone, just the private physical fact of being a person who was 3 months pregnant and sitting in the dark in a city that wasn't hers, in a marriage that wasn't a marriage, and in love with someone she was terrified of, not because he'd hurt her, but because he never would, because she was the exception, and she could already feel what it meant to be someone's exception in a world where everyone else was not. She sat there for a long time. Then she stood up and went to his office and stood outside it and heard him on the phone again, his voice low and cold and precise, arranging Priya's safety with the efficiency of a man who arranged things like this regularly. She pressed her hand flat against the door. She thought about this face he'd made when she told him about the twins. That uncontrolled, unguarded moment of being undone. She thought about it carefully, held it against everything else, weighed it. Then she went back to the bedroom and sat in the dark again, and picked up her phone and began, without having decided to begin, to search flights to Portland. She bought 2 tickets before she could talk herself out of it. One for tonight, one open return. She told herself she was doing this for the twins. She told herself that so many times in the next 2 hours, while she packed quietly and waited for Min-jae to finish the calls that would keep her sister safe. That by the time she heard his footsteps in the hallway, the words had worn completely through, and what was left underneath them was the truth she'd been sitting on top of all night. She was leaving because she loved him, and she could not watch him become, for her children, what his own father had apparently been for him. A man who was capable of love, and also capable of things that love could not fix or contain or outlast. She left the letter on the kitchen counter. She was in the elevator before she remembered she hadn't told him about the tickets. She pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator descended. 52 floors of her own heartbeat, and at the bottom, the door opened into the marble lobby, and the night doorman held the door and the city opened up around her, indifferent and enormous, and the cab smelled like pine air freshener and old upholstery, and Amara sat in the back with her bag between her feet and watched the midtown block scroll past, and told herself she was not going to cry again, which lasted approximately 4 minutes before her body overruled her, and she cried silently into the collar of her coat for the second time since she'd come to this city, the first time having been the day she arrived. The driver didn't say anything. She was grateful for that. JFK at 11 at night was its own particular kind of purgatory, fluorescent and echoic and full of people in transit, nobody where they wanted to be yet, everyone suspended between one thing and the next. Amara checked her bag, went through security, found the gate, sat in a plastic chair and stared at the departure board and felt the specific hollowness of a person who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the machinery of it to carry her forward, because going back would require more than she had left. Her phone had 12 missed calls. She'd turned the ringer off in the elevator and hadn't turned it back on. She looked at the call log now. 8 from Min-jae, 2 from Han, 1 from a number she didn't recognize, 1 from Priya, which she returned. "I'm okay," Priya said when she answered. "There are 2 men outside the building who I'm told are there to keep an eye on things. It's a lot, Amara." "I know, I'm sorry." "Where are you?" "JFK, I'm coming home." A pause. "I need you to let me explain when I get there. Not tonight, but when I get there." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" "I will be." "Amara." "I will be," she said again, and let it close the subject the way she always had, and hated herself a little for it. She didn't look at Min-jae's calls. She sat with the phone in her lap and breathed and made herself think forward rather than back, which was the only direction that would do her any good now. Portland, Priya, the twins, a plan that accounted for the fact that she was 3.5 months pregnant with the children of a man who ran a criminal organization and who had a traitor in his inner circle who had already demonstrated willingness to use her family as leverage. Thinking forward lasted until boarding, and then the plane was moving and the city fell away below her in a grid of lights that looked, from above, like something designed rather than grown, and she put her face against the window and said goodbye to it without making a sound. She was asleep before they reached cruising altitude, the kind of sleep that comes from a body that has reached its limit and simply powers down, dreamless and total, until the wheels touched Portland tarmac at 2 in the morning and the jolt brought her back. Priya was at the arrival's door. She didn't say anything. She just held her, and Amara let herself be held, and stood there in the cold Oregon air outside the terminal, and let her sister be the one holding for once. 3 years passed. The way that time passes when you are building something and surviving something simultaneously, not slowly, not quickly, but in the accumulated weight of days that each require you to function, which eventually becomes a kind of momentum that carries you through even the ones you would have said in advance you couldn't get through. Jaden and Elijah were born in August, 7 weeks after Amara came home, at a Portland hospital with Priya in the room and Winston in the waiting area, clean and present for the first time in a long time. They were small and loud and completely indifferent to the enormous complications of their existence, which Amara found, in the raw aftermath of labor, the most clarifying thing she'd ever witnessed. She named them herself. She did not call Min-jae to tell him about the birth. She told herself this was protection. On good days, she believed it. She got a job at a children's bookstore on Alberta Street owned by a woman named Delia, who was 60 and practical, and asked no questions about the absence of a father and gave Amara flexible hours for the first 6 months. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 6 blocks from Priya. Her father joined a recovery program, a real one this time, not the superficial version she'd arranged before, and attended meetings with the consistency of a man who had finally accepted that the alternative was losing everything. She told Priya the truth on a Sunday in October, 11 weeks after the boys were born. She sat across from her sister at the kitchen table with both twins asleep in the next room and told her all of it. The debt, the contract, the 9 pages, Min-jae, the organization, the leak, the letter she'd left on the kitchen counter, all of it. She told it without softening it, which was the only way she knew how to do things she'd been putting off. Priya cried. Then she was angry. Then she cried again. Then she made coffee and sat back down and said, "Do they look like him?" Amara laughed, which surprised both of them. "Elijah does, around the eyes, and he doesn't know." "No." Priya was quiet for a long time. "That's not right, Amara." "I know. I mean, what you did, for us, I understand it, I do, but those boys have a father who doesn't know they exist. A father who—" "I know what he is," Priya said. "I know what you were afraid of, but they're people. They're going to ask." Amara looked at her coffee. I know. She knew. She'd known from the first time Jaden, at 14 months, looked at a photograph on Delia's desk, a photo of Delia's husband, and reached for it with both hands, the way babies reached for things they wanted to hold. She'd known every time she caught herself looking at Elijah's eyes and not being able to pretend she wasn't looking for something specific in them. She built the life. It wasn't the life she'd planned before any of this, but it was real. The bookstore, the apartment, her sons growing into themselves, her father becoming incrementally more reliable, her sister finishing her nursing program and getting a position at OHSU. Real, and hers, and quiet in a way she hadn't expected to find livable, but did. She thought about Min-jae the way you thought about something that had happened to you rather than something you'd chosen, which was the lie she told herself, and which worked less and less well as the boys got older and started having opinions and expressions she recognized from a face she'd spent 4 months learning. She did not call him. He found her on a Thursday in late September, 3 years and 2 months after she left the letter on his kitchen counter. She was shelving picture books in the back section of Delia's store, both boys at daycare, the afternoon quiet and full of the particular smell of paper and wood that she'd come to love the way you loved things that had been consistently kind to you. She heard the bell above the door, heard Delia greet someone, heard the footsteps that came toward the back of the store with a quality she recognized before her brain caught up. A particular cadence, unhurried and deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had decided to do something and was doing it. She turned around. He was thinner than she remembered. Not unhealthy. He was still himself, still present in a room the way a structural element was present, the way a load-bearing wall was present. But something in his face had changed, worn down and rebuilt at a slightly different angle. He was in a dark coat, no tie. He looked like what he was, which was a man who had come a long way to do something he'd thought about carefully. He was holding a photograph. She knew before she looked at it. Her hands went cold. "How?" she said. Her voice came out barely above speaking volume, which was all she had. "Marcus," he said. "Not easily, not quickly. I didn't come to take them from you." He held the photograph out. She could see now it was the boys, taken from a distance, probably from the street, them in the small yard behind the apartment building. "I came because they're mine too, and I think you know that what I'm asking for is not unreasonable." Her heart was doing something she could feel in her ears. She put down the book she was holding because her hands were no longer steady enough to hold them. "You had someone photograph my children," she said. "I had someone confirm they existed. The photograph—" He looked at it, then back at her. "I had to know they were real before I came. Before I asked." "You had no right. I had no right to know my own children were alive?" His voice was controlled. It cost him. She could see exactly what it cost him. "Amara, I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to threaten. I'm asking for the chance to be their father." "You can't be their father. You know what you are." "I know what I was." He took a step, not toward her, to the side, enough to be fully visible in the narrow aisle. 3 years. I want to tell you what 3 years looks like, and I need you to listen before you tell me to leave. She almost did. Almost told him to leave. The word was right there, shaped and ready. Instead, she heard herself say, "Talk." He talked. He told her about finding the letter. He told her about the week after, which he described in the clipped, understated language of someone who had processed something catastrophic and come out the other side, understanding something they hadn't understood before. He told her about Vice Chair Lim, his uncle, his mother's brother, who had been feeding information to Choi for 8 months, and whose motive turned out to be not money, but the specific resentment of a man who had been passed over and never recovered from it. He told her the confirmation had come 2 weeks after she left, and what followed it, and he told it plainly, without detail, and she understood the plain version. He told her he'd spent 6 months after that looking at the organization he'd built, and seeing it clearly for the first time. Seeing the version of it his children would inherit if he did nothing, seeing the version of himself that had stood in an office doorway, and told her once that he found lying exhausting, and understanding that the biggest lie he'd been living inside was the one he told himself about. Which parts of his life could be kept separate from which other parts? He told her about the restructuring, 2 years of it, extricating himself from the criminal structure, piece by piece, territory by territory, absorbing the losses and the threats and the contempt of people who saw it as weakness. He'd built legitimate businesses, imports, commercial real estate, a financial consultancy that worked with companies he'd once extorted. He'd done it not because he was a good man, but because he wanted to be a father his sons could look at without learning the wrong things. He said all of this standing in the picture book aisle of Delia's bookstore in Portland, Oregon, with a photograph of his twin sons in his hand. When he finished, Amara was sitting on the floor against the bookshelf, which she didn't remember deciding to do. Her legs had made the decision somewhere during the telling. She looked up at him. "I need to check everything you just said," she told him. "I know. I have people I can ask, and I will ask them. All of it. I know. And if any part of it doesn't hold, it holds." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not here to manipulate you. I'm here because they're mine, and because you're—" He stopped, said the next part more carefully, like he was placing something fragile. "Because whatever I built or dismantled or changed in the past 3 years, you were still the reason I understood why it needed to change. And I'm not saying that to get something from you. I'm saying it because you told me once that the condition of our arrangement was that I tell you the truth. I'm still honoring that, even without the arrangement." The bookstore was very quiet. Somewhere in the front, she heard Delia moving around, not intervening, giving them whatever space the small store could offer. She checked everything he'd said. It took her 2 weeks and 4 conversations with people whose judgment she trusted. Marcus confirmed the restructuring. Not all of it, but enough. A contact of Priya's who worked with a federal agency's financial crimes division confirmed that the Kong organization's criminal profile had dropped to near zero over the past 18 months. Chairman Park, who she called through Marcus at considerable personal discomfort, told her in 4 sentences that Min Jae had given up more than anyone had expected and that the people who'd called it weakness had been wrong. She let him meet the boys on a Tuesday afternoon in October at a park near the apartment, with Priya present and the understanding that it was one afternoon and nothing was decided. He sat on the ground with them. They were 3.5 years old and completely unimpressed by him initially, which she found, watching from a bench with Priya beside her, both agonizing and correct. Elijah warmed up first. She'd expected that. Elijah warmed up to everything eventually. He climbed into Min Jae's lap with the casual confidence of a child who had never been given reason to doubt he was welcome. And Min Jae went very still in the particular way she remembered, the way he went still when something mattered enormously, and he was concentrating on not showing how much. Priya said nothing. She took Amara's hand and held it. The weeks that followed had a shape neither of them had planned. Min Jae in Portland, staying in a hotel that he'd taken on a monthly basis, appearing at the park on Tuesdays and Saturdays, learning his son's preferences and rhythms with the methodical attention he gave everything. He was good with them in a way that surprised her. Patient, quiet, never pushing for more than they offered, reading their signals correctly and adjusting. Elijah called him by his first name, which nobody had told him to do, which came out as a 3-year-old's approximation of Min Jae that sounded like something else entirely and made him laugh the first time, a real laugh, The kind she'd heard from him exactly twice in 4 months and had not forgotten. Jaden took longer. Jaden was cautious by nature, the one who watched before he moved, who tasted before he committed. She saw Min Jae register this and not force it, which told her something. 3 months in, she let him come to the apartment, not to stay, to dinner, with her and Priya and the boys, the 5 of them around a table that wasn't built for 5 but managed. She was beginning to understand something she hadn't been ready to understand before, which was that the past 3 years had not unmade what she felt, had only compressed it under the weight of surviving and building and refusing to look at it directly. She was still deciding what to do with that understanding when the photographs arrived. The first one was in the mail, no postage, hand-delivered. A photograph of Jaden at the park, close enough to have been taken from the same bench she usually sat on. She stood in the hallway of her apartment with the photo in her hand and felt the cold that started in her chest and spread outward. She called Min Jae. He was at her door in 20 minutes. He looked at the photograph. His face did something she'd seen once before, the controlled thing, the costly thing, the thing that happened when something large was being held under enormous pressure. "This is Choi," he said. "I thought you—" "I removed myself from the structure. I didn't remove him from existence." His voice was very quiet. "He's been watching for 3 years, waiting for the moment when I had something worth taking. He's going to use the boys. He already is. This photograph is a message." He looked at her. "I need to move you. All of you. Tonight." "Where?" "I have a property, Mountain Estate, 2 hours from here. Security infrastructure. My people, your people. Not the organization. My own. Private, paid, vetted since before I started the restructuring. People who work for me specifically, not for any larger structure." He held her eyes. "I know what you're thinking. I know how this sounds. But Amara, the boys." She looked at the photograph, at Jaden's face, his serious expression, his small hand around the swing chain. "Get my father and my sister," she said. He moved fast. She'd forgotten how fast he could organize things when the situation required it. Within 2 hours, all of them were in vehicles headed east into the mountains. Her father didn't ask questions. Priya asked several and received answers that were partial but enough. The boys, exhausted and confused and picking up on the adult frequency of the night, fell asleep before they cleared the city. The estate was what he'd described, large, set back from the road behind a tree line, with people she didn't recognize already positioned at intervals she couldn't see from the main house but felt. The inside was not what she expected. Warm, not cold, stocked, prepared, as if someone had been maintaining it in case of exactly this. He'd been maintaining it in case of exactly this. She understood that standing in the kitchen at midnight, her sons asleep upstairs and her sister and father in rooms down the hall, and Min Jae beside her going through the security feed on a tablet with the same focused intensity she'd watched him apply to everything. "How long have you been preparing for this?" she said. "Since the first Tuesday at the park." He didn't look up from the tablet. "When I realized I was going to stay." She looked at the side of his face, at the line of his jaw and the scar above his eyebrow. The same eyebrow she'd cleaned butterfly tape off in a different kitchen a lifetime ago. And the scar was the marker of whatever hadn't quite closed right. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll watch the feeds." "I'm not going to sleep." "Then sit down." She sat. She watched him work. She watched him be, for the first time since she'd known him, entirely present in a situation that concerned his family, applying everything he was to keeping them safe. And she watched it the way she'd watched everything about him, cataloging, assessing, finding it consistently more than she'd budgeted for. 3 days at the estate. 3 days of the boys adapting with the resilience of small children for whom adults bearing tension was simply a weather condition to be navigated. Min Jae made breakfast every morning, and she watched Jaden come to him on the second morning and stand at his elbow while he cooked, silently, in the way Jaden approached things he was considering, and she watched Min Jae register it without comment, just shift slightly to make room at the counter. The attack came on the 4th night. She heard it before she understood it. Sounds from the perimeter, wrong sounds, the kind that shouldn't be there at 2 in the morning in the mountains. Then Min Jae was at the bedroom door, already dressed, and his face in the low light was controlled in the way it was when the cost was at its highest. "Safe room," he said. "Down the hall, second door on the left, steel reinforced, Code is 4621. Take the boys. Take your phone. He looked at her once, fully, for a split second, the mask off completely. I need you in there. Min Jae, please. The word came out stripped of everything but its meaning. Please. She got the boys. She got Priya. Her father was already at the safe room door when she reached it, directed there by one of the security people, his face the face of a man who understood, finally, the full weight of what his choices had set in motion. She got them all inside. She punched the code. The steel door sealed. Inside, a bank of security monitors showed the property from a dozen angles. She found the feed covering the main approach and watched it and made herself breathe. She saw them coming through the tree line, 6 men, armed, moving in a formation that told her they'd done this before. She saw Min Jae's people intercept the first 2 before they reached the house. She saw the movement on the east side where someone had anticipated the flanking approach. She found the feed that showed the front entry, found Min Jae. He was moving through the front of the house, coordinating through an earpiece, and she watched him with her hands pressed flat against the monitor panel, and her heartbeat in her throat, and the complete non-negotiable certainty of a feeling she'd been half-naming for 3 years landing on her like something physical. She could not watch him die. She could not survive watching him die, which meant that whatever she'd been calling her reasons for the distance she'd maintained, whatever she'd been filing under protection and caution and the boys need stability, all of it was the thinner story, the one she told when the real story was too large to hold out in the open. She loved him. She had loved him for a long time. And it was not uncomplicated, and it was not clean, and she didn't know yet what it would require of both of them to make it into something livable, but it was not a fact she could continue maintaining as a question. On the monitor, she watched one of the attackers break through the east entry, watched Min Jae redirect without hesitation, moving toward the sound, watched the struggle in the corridor that the camera angle caught at the worst possible angle, partial and shadowed, and then watched Min Jae go down on one knee. Her hand hit the safe room door before she knew she was moving. Priya caught her arm. Don't. Don't open that door. Priya's voice was urgent, low. Amara, don't. On the monitor, Min Jae was back on his feet, moving slower, his left arm held differently, but moving, directing, still coordinating through the earpiece, still in the fight. She stood at the door with her hand on the steel and her forehead against the cool surface and breathed. Behind her, Jaden said quietly, Mama, where's Min Jae? She turned around. Her son was sitting on the floor with his brother, both of them awake and watching her with their father's eyes. That particular quality of attention, reading her, registering, storing. And she crossed the room and sat between them and put one arm around each of them and felt their weight against her sides and held it and held it and held it. The safe room feeds showed the last of the attackers down at 3:47 in the morning. She heard the knock on the door at 3:52, Han's voice, saying it was clear. She punched the code. The door opened. Han was standing in the hallway with the controlled face of someone who had been in several bad situations and was managing the aftermath of this one. He was uninjured. He looked at her and said, "He's asking for you." She followed him down the hall and through the main room to the study at the back of the house, where 2 of Min Jae's people were working, and one of them was doing something to his left arm that Min Jae was tolerating with the stillness of someone using everything they had, not to react. The cut on his arm was long and had been bleeding considerably. The person working on it was not a doctor, but was doing something competent with it. Min Jae's face, when he looked up at her, was the most open she'd ever seen it. Not undone, not broken, but the control stripped down to its structural minimum, leaving just the man underneath. "The boys," he said. "They're fine. Everyone's fine." She crossed to him. She stood in front of him. She looked at the arm, and then at his face and said, "How bad?" "Manageable." "That's not what I asked." 12 stitches, probably. Nothing that won't close." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The room was moving around them. His people working, Han on the phone, the machinery of aftermath in full operation. And in the middle of it, they were very still, the 2 of them, in the way they had always been able to be still together even when everything around them was not. "I watched you go down," she said. "I know. I saw the safe room camera activate. Don't do that again." Something moved through his face. "I'll do my best." "Min Jae." She put her hand against the side of his face, which she had not done before, ever, not once in 4 months in the penthouse or 3 months of Tuesdays at the park, and she felt him go very still at the contact in the way a person went still when something they'd stopped expecting happened. Don't do that again. He put his right hand over hers, held it there. Outside the study window, the mountains were beginning to go gray at the edges with early light, and somewhere down the hall her sons were awake, and her sister was keeping them occupied, and her father was sitting with the full weight of everything, and Choi Byung-won was still out there, still a problem, still a calculation that needed a final answer, and none of the large things were resolved. None of the questions about what came next had been answered yet. But she was standing in a study at 4 in the morning, with her hand against the face of the man she loved, and he was bleeding and alive and holding on, and somewhere in the space between those facts was the beginning of an answer. She was finally, after 3 years and 3 months, and all the distance she'd put between herself and the truth, ready to give. The doctor came at 6 in the morning. Not a hospital doctor, a man Min Jae's people reached by phone at 4:15, who arrived at the estate with a medical bag and the unhurried manner of someone who had been doing this kind of work for a long time and had made his peace with the hours. He stitched the arm in the study while Min Jae sat without moving, and Amara stood in the doorway and watched and made herself stay there rather than leave, because leaving felt like a habit she was trying to break. 14 stitches, not 12. The doctor said something in Korean. Han translated without being asked. The wound was clean, no arterial involvement, rest and antibiotics, no significant use of the arm for 2 weeks minimum. Min Jae said something back. Han's translation. He said he understood. The doctor left at 7. The boys woke at 7:15, which was their normal time, regardless of what had happened the night before, because children that age had no mechanism for delaying morning, and Amara heard them before she saw them. Their voices from down the hall, Elijah's higher and continuous, Jaden's lower and intermittent. The particular music of them that she'd spent 3 years listening to in the dark when she couldn't sleep and needed something real to hold on to. She went to them. She got them dressed and fed them in the estate kitchen with cereal from the pantry that had been stocked by someone who'd anticipated children, which she noted and filed away. She sat at the table with both boys and drank coffee and listened to Elijah tell her about a dream involving a dog they didn't have. And she let the ordinary machinery of morning run because it was the only thing that made any of the rest of it make sense. Min Jae appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8. His arm was bandaged under his sleeve, the sleeve rolled down and buttoned, and he'd changed his shirt, and he looked like what he was. A man who'd been up all night and was running on the particular fuel of someone who had too much left to do to stop yet. He looked at the boys first, then at her. Choi got away, he said. She'd known. She'd read it in Han's face at 3:52 when he opened the safe room door. Tell me. His people ran when ours engaged. He wasn't on the property. He directed from a distance. 2 of his men are in custody. Local law enforcement is going to have questions by this afternoon. How are you handling that? I have a lawyer, and I've been building a relationship with the FBI Financial Crimes Division for 14 months. There's an agent named Reeves who's been investigating Choi's operation independently. I've been providing information. He looked at her steadily. I was going to tell you. The timing wasn't... I know, she said. I know the timing. Tell me what Reeves has. He told her. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen while his sons ate cereal and the morning light came through the mountain windows, and he laid it out plainly. 14 months of cooperation, documented financial flows, the names of Choi's supply chain connections, the location of 3 properties used for operations, and the 2 men now in custody who were, by Min Jae's assessment, not people who would remain silent for long given the charges they were facing. Reeves can move on Choi with what she already has, he said. Last night gives her additional grounds. I'm meeting with her this morning. Here? Neutral location, 2 hours from here. He paused. I'd like to close this. For good. Whatever it costs me in terms of what I have to give Reeves, testimony, documentation, whatever she needs, I want Choi done. Amara looked at him. And what does that cost you? Some exposure. Things I'd rather not have on record. He said it without flinching. But the alternative is that he's out there and he knows where you are and he's demonstrated that he'll use the boys. He looked at Elijah, who was looking back at him with the open curiosity of a child who had decided he was interesting. So, she said. She let him go. She spent the morning at the estate with her father and her sister and her sons, which was its own kind of reckoning. Her father sitting on the back porch in the mountain air with the specific posture of a man reviewing the ledger of his choices, and Amara went out and sat beside him without agenda, without the prepared speech she'd been carrying for 3 years in the part of her mind where undelivered things went. He spoke first. "I know what I cost you," he said. He was watching the tree line, the morning light and the pines. "I've known for a long time, I just didn't—" He stopped. There's no version of this where I finish that sentence and it sounds like anything but an excuse. "No," she agreed. "I'm sorry, Amara." She looked at the side of his face. 64 years old, and finally, she thought, actually present inside his own life. Not performing presence, not promising it, but sitting in it with the whole weight of what it contained. That had taken him a long time. She'd spent years being angry about how long. She was still angry, she realized, but the anger had changed shape. It wasn't the compressed, pressurized thing she'd been carrying. It was something more like a wound that had finally been cleaned, which hurt differently, and also, eventually, healed differently. "I know," she said. He reached over and put his hand over hers. His hand was large and familiar and old, the hand that had driven her to college interviews in a car that needed the heat fixed. She turned her palm up and held it. They sat like that for a while. Minjae came back at 2 in the afternoon. He came in through the front and found her in the living room where the boys were building something elaborate with the cushions from the couch that she'd decided not to intervene in. He sat across from her. His face had the quality it got when something large had been resolved. Not relief exactly, more like the specific flatness of a pressure that had been sustained for a long time and had finally been allowed to release. "Reeves is moving tonight," he said. "She had enough before I walked in. What I gave her today? It's significant. She'll have Choi before morning." "What did you give her?" "Everything she needed. Financial records, property locations, testimony on 3 counts including the attack last night." He looked at his hands. "Some of it is going to come back to things I was involved in. Historic. Reeves is offering limited immunity in exchange for full cooperation. My lawyers reviewed the terms this morning. Limited immunity means? It means I'm not walking away clean. There will be civil exposure. Some assets may be subject to seizure. My name will be attached to a federal investigation in a way that's going to be public." He met her eyes. "I'm telling you this because you should know what you're standing near when the story comes out." Amara looked at him for a long time. "You did this knowing that." "I did this because the alternative was Choi remaining a problem for my children." He said it plainly. "The cost to me is a number on a spreadsheet and some public discomfort. The alternative was—" He stopped. "There's no version where I chose the spreadsheet." She understood then, fully and finally, the thing she'd been circling for 3 years and 4 months. Not that he was good. She'd never been naive enough to require that, but that what he chose to protect, and what he was willing to pay for it, and where he put himself in the hierarchy of things that mattered, those things were true and consistent, and had been true and consistent even when she wasn't there to see them. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She called Marcus that evening. She told him what was happening, not the operational details, but the shape of it, and Marcus was quiet for a moment and then said, "You all right?" "Yes." "The boys?" "They're fine. They're currently destroying the furniture in the living room." A pause. She could hear him deciding whether to say the next thing. "He came to me for help finding you 2 years ago. Did you know that?" "No. I told him I'd reach out when I thought you were ready." Another pause. "I waited a year before I did." "Why a year?" "Because you needed to build it yourself first, without him in it. So you'd know it was yours." Marcus's voice had the particular roughness of someone saying something they'd thought about for a long time. "I've known you since you were 26 years old making housing complaints on behalf of people who couldn't make them for themselves. You've been holding things up since before I met you. I wanted you to know you could put some of it down." She sat with that for a moment. "Thank you, Marcus." "Don't thank me. Just keep those boys from growing up to owe money to the wrong people." She laughed, which surprised her, and hung up. The federal operation moved overnight. Reeves called Minjae at 6 in the morning with a confirmation she delivered in the terse, factual language of someone who communicated in outcomes. Choi Byung-won was in custody. 3 properties had been taken. 11 arrests across 2 states. The operation Min-jae had been feeding information into for 14 months had, as of 6:14 on a Thursday morning in late October, concluded. He told Amara over coffee in the kitchen before the boys woke. He said it simply, without performance, and she received it the same way. They sat with it for a moment. The end of the thing that had started with a letter in a Portland mailbox, what felt like another lifetime. The through line of violence and debt and fear that had run under everything. Finally, she let herself use the word, finished. What now? She said. He looked at his coffee. That's what I want to talk to you about. She waited. The estate in New York is being wound down. The legal exposure from cooperating with Reeves will take 6 to 8 months to fully resolve. My lawyers are managing it. He looked up. I have legitimate holdings that aren't subject to seizure. The commercial real estate, most of the consultancy. It's not what it was. It's enough. A pause. I'd like to be in the same city as my children. Portland. If that's where you are. She looked at him. He looked back. Outside, the mountain morning was clear and cold and indifferent, the way mountains were, the way the world was, completely unconcerned with whether the people inside this kitchen figured anything out. I'm not going back to the contract, she said. I'm not asking for the contract. I'm not going to make a decision about us, about what we are, because of the boys. That can't be the reason. It isn't. The boys are the reason I'm in this city. You are the reason I want to be in the same room as you. He said it without breaking eye contact, without hedging it. Those are different things, and I'm aware of the difference. She breathed. In through her nose, out slowly, the way she breathed when she was making a decision she needed to feel clearly and not just think. There's an apartment 4 blocks from mine that's been vacant since August, she said. My neighbor Delia knows the landlord. He was quiet for a moment. An apartment. You can see your children every day from 4 blocks away. And we can... She stopped. Found the right words. We can find out what we are without a contract and without a crisis forcing the question. Slowly. I don't do things slowly. You said that to me 3 years ago. You're going to have to learn. He looked at her for a long time, then... All right. They were back in Portland by the end of the week. Min-jae's people handled the logistics of the estate. Han, who was not the leak and who had been operating under the shadow of that suspicion for 3 months without knowing it, was told the full truth by Min-jae in a conversation Amara wasn't present for but heard about afterward from Min-jae himself, who told it plainly, including the suspicion, including what it had cost Han without Han knowing, and who said that Han had responded to it with a silence and then a single sentence about how he understood, and that the only thing he asked in return was to be told directly, next time, rather than watched. Min-jae said he'd agreed. Amara, when she heard it, believed him. The apartment 4 blocks away was secured through Delia's landlord by the 2nd week of November. Min-jae moved into it with a minimal version of everything. A bed, a table, a kitchen he stocked with the same deliberate precision she remembered. He did not decorate. She asked him about that once, in early December, standing in the living room that had nothing on the walls. I was going to ask you, he said. Ask me what? What to put on them? He looked at the walls. I've been living in spaces other people designed for most of my life. I've never chosen. She thought about this. What do you like? He considered it with the seriousness he applied to everything. Landscapes, he said. Things that suggest a lot of space. She went with him on a Saturday while the boys were with Priya, and they went to 3 galleries and a print shop, and he stood in front of things for a long time, and she stood beside him and said nothing and let him look. And at the end of the afternoon, he'd chosen 2 prints, and she'd chosen 1, and they'd argued briefly about where the 3rd one went, which was the best argument she'd had in recent memory. The autumn passed into winter, and the shape of things became gradually something that had its own structure. He was at the apartment most mornings when she came by with the boys. He did not impose a rhythm. He absorbed theirs, learning the particular requirements of 2 4-year-olds who were identical in appearance and completely different in temperament, and he adapted to each of them with the attention he'd always given things that mattered to him. Jaden came to him in December. Not dramatically. It wasn't a moment she'd been told about or witnessed. It happened on a Tuesday morning when she was getting the boys into their coats, and Jaden walked to Minji and said, with the directness of someone who had thought about it and arrived at a conclusion, "Are you our dad?" The room went very quiet. Minji crouched down to Jaden's level. He was very careful. She could see him being careful, choosing the next thing the way you chose something you knew you only got one chance to say right. "Yes," he said. "I am." Jaden looked at him for a moment with those assessing eyes. "Okay," he said, and turned around and went to get his other shoe. Amara looked at the ceiling. She looked at it for quite a while. She told her father the full truth in January. Not the version she'd told him at the beginning, the real version, the contract, the 9 pages, all of it. They sat at his kitchen table, the house he was renting now that was small and clean and maintained by a man trying one day at a time to live inside rather than alongside his own life. She told it without softening it, and he listened without defending himself. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I put you in a position where you did that," he said. "Yes." "And you didn't tell me what it cost." "No." He looked at his hands. "I've been thinking about what you could possibly need from me now that would make any difference. And I keep coming back to the same thing, which is that there isn't one. There isn't something I can do that makes the weight of it lighter." "No," she said. "There isn't." "So what do you need from me?" She thought about it honestly, the way she owed him and herself. "I need you to keep going," she said. "I need you to stay in the rooms and keep going and let Jaden and Elijah know their grandfather. That's what I need." He looked up. His eyes were full of something she didn't try to name. "I can do that," he said. "I know you can." Winter moved towards spring with the gradual insistence of seasons that don't ask permission. The boys turned 4 in February, a birthday party at Delia's bookstore after hours that was chaotic and loud and exactly right, with Priya and her father and Delia and Marcus's cousin, Destiny and Minjay, sitting on a too small chair eating cake that Elijah had half destroyed with the candles. And the particular quality of a room full of people who had all, in their different ways, been through something and come out the other side and were sitting in a bookstore in Portland with frosting on their hands. Minjay gave the boys Korean picture books. He sat with them on the floor of the bookstore after the party, when most people had gone and read to them in Korean, with the occasional English translation, his voice doing the particular thing it did when he was giving something real, lower, more careful, stripped of the professional register that he wore most other places. The boys leaned against him, one on each side, and she watched from across the room with Delia beside her and let herself look at it directly, the whole thing, without looking away. Delia said, "He loves them." "Yes," Amara said, "and you." She didn't answer right away. She watched him turn the page, watched Elijah point at something on the page and ask a question, watched Minjay answer it. "Yes," she said. "What are you going to do about it?" She looked at the side of Delia's face, 60 years old and completely uninterested in being indirect. "I'm working on it." "Work faster," Delia said, and went to get more cake. She told him in March, on an evening in his apartment after the boys were in bed in the room he'd set up for them. 2 small beds, a bookshelf, a nightlight, all of it chosen with the same deliberateness he gave everything. She sat across from him at the table that now had things on it, because a table used by 2 4-year-olds regularly accumulated things regardless of intention, and she looked at him in the way she'd learned to look at him over 4 months in a penthouse and 3 months of parks, and then 3 years of distance that had not, apparently, done anything to reduce the resolution of the looking. "I'm not going to keep pretending that this is provisional," she said. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. "I stayed in the arrangement for 4 months because I had to. I left because I was afraid." She held his eyes. "I was afraid of what you were, and I was afraid of how much I felt. And those were not equally legitimate fears, and I've spent 3 years sorting out which was which." She breathed. "I'm done being afraid of the second one." He was very still. "This isn't because of the boys," she said. "I told you that would never be the reason, and I meant it. This is because you stood in a federal agent's office and gave her everything she needed, knowing what it would cost you. And you did it without telling me first because you didn't need my permission. You needed to be the kind of person who does that kind of thing. And you were." She paused. "That's the reason." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, the same way her father had on the porch of the mountain estate, and she thought briefly about the different weights of different hands and how much could be said by the simple fact of one person putting their hand over another's. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask?" "Not tonight." He looked at her steadily. "Not while we're in the middle of something. I want it to be a clear thing, on its own." She understood. "Okay. Soon." "Okay." He held her hand. He asked on an evening in April, a Saturday, after they'd taken the boys to the Japanese garden near the university because Elijah had become fixated on turtles, and there were turtles in the garden pond, and they'd spent an hour walking the paths with two children who had completely different agendas and managed both simultaneously, which Amara had come to understand was something they did well together. The management of divergent needs, the particular coordination of two people who paid attention to different things, and between them caught most of it. On the walk back to the car, the boys running slightly ahead on the path with the careening confidence of 4-year-olds who had not yet internalized consequences, Min-jae stopped walking. She stopped with him. He reached into his jacket pocket, and she understood before she saw it, and her heart did the thing it did. Not the cold thing, not the thing with fear underneath, but the other thing, the one she'd stopped trying to categorize. It was a ring, simple, not elaborate. A single dark stone in a plain band, the kind of choice that looked considered rather than performed. "No contract," he said. "No debt. No reason except that I want you to be my wife because you are the only person I've ever met who told me the truth when the truth was uncomfortable and argued with me about wall art and cleaned butterfly tape off my face and left me a letter that was the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me and made me understand that the empire I spent 20 years building was the wrong thing to be building." He held her eyes. "I want to build the right thing. With you. If you'll let me." Jaden and Elijah had stopped running. She didn't know when they'd turned back, but they were standing a few feet away, both of them watching with the focused attention of children who understood that something significant was happening even without understanding exactly what. She looked at the ring. She looked at Min-jae. She looked at her sons. She said yes. Jaden cheered, which he did rarely, and therefore with maximum impact. Elijah clapped once, decided this was insufficient, and hugged Min-jae's leg with the totality that small children brought to physical affection. His entire body committed to it, nothing held back. She put the ring on her own finger. It fit. They married in June, in Delia's backyard on a Sunday, which Delia offered and which was the right size for the right people. Family, close, without performance. Her father walked her to the spot where Min-jae was standing under the climbing roses that Delia had been growing for 12 years, and she felt her father's arm under her hand and thought about the hardware store and the college interviews and the letter in the mailbox and everything. The distance between then and this moment had cost and contained, and she thought that some things were paid for at a price that you couldn't call worth it until you were standing at the end of them looking back, and that she was standing at the end of one now. Min-jae's mother flew in from Seoul. Soo-yeon wore silver and stood very straight and watched the ceremony with an expression that was not warm exactly, but was something more durable than warmth. The expression of a woman who had spent her life watching her son make choices and had finally seen one she didn't have to worry about. Priya cried. Priya had been crying intermittently since the morning and was not apologetic about it. Jaden and Elijah stood beside their parents in matching shirts they'd been bribed into tolerating and were, for approximately 7 minutes during the vows, the stillest Amara had ever seen them. Then Elijah whispered something to Jaden that made Jaden laugh, and the ceremony absorbed it without breaking, because that was the kind of ceremony it was, built for real people, with room for the noise of them. She looked at Min-jae while they said the words, simple ones, written by themselves, plain and honest, and saw in his face the man she'd first read across a desk in a downtown building on a November afternoon, and the man who cooked at 7 in the morning and remembered her students' names and chose landscape prints for bare walls, and the man who had knelt on one knee on a mountain estate floor and told her he needed her in a safe room, the word please stripped to its bone, all of it at once. She had not lost her freedom when she married Kang Min-jae. She understood that completely now, standing in Delia's backyard in June with her sons beside her and her father behind her and the climbing roses doing what they'd been doing for 12 years regardless of what happened beneath them. She had walked through a door she chose, at a cost she accepted, toward people she would not leave again. And Min Jae, who had built his empire through fear and dismantled it through love, who had given testimony in a federal office and chosen what mattered over what he controlled, who had crouched to his son's level and said yes without hesitation. Min Jae had learned the only thing his grandmother's kitchen had been trying to teach him the whole time, that feeding someone was not a transaction, that showing up was not weakness, that the greatest thing a man who understood power could do was learn, finally and completely, when to put it down. They ate in Delia's backyard until the light went gold and then gray, and the boys fell asleep at the table between one moment and the next, the way children did, sudden and total. And Min Jae carried Jaden and Amara carried Elijah to Delia's guest room, and they laid them down in the quiet and stood in the doorway together and looked at the two of them, small, breathing, entirely at rest. And Amara felt Min Jae's hand find hers in the dark of the doorway, and she held it. And they stood there while the party continued softly in the yard outside, while the city made its sounds beyond the fence, while the evening settled into night, while everything that had cost so much to arrive at finally, and without ceremony, became simply the life they were living.